The studio lights blazed down like a spotlight on a prize fight. But this was no ordinary showdown. It was political theater at its most raw and electrifying. Jasmine Crockett, the bold and articulate congresswoman from Texas, took her seat across from Alan Dershowitz, the storied legal scholar known for defending controversial figures and wielding constitutional law like a weapon. The topic: executive power and the limits of presidential authority. Asterisk, the air in the studio felt electric. You could almost hear the collective breath being held by the live audience as the moderator introduced the topic. Tonight, we're asking, where does executive power end and congressional authority begin? Mr. Dershowitz, your opening remarks. Asterisk. Dershowitz leaned forward confidently, as if stepping into a familiar arena. Presidents must have the freedom to act swiftly and decisively, particularly in matters of national security. The Constitution vests the executive branch with unique authority for this reason. It's not about politics, it's about practicality and precedent. From Lincoln to Roosevelt to Bush, history has shown that presidential discretion is necessary. Asterisk, he launched into a carefully constructed argument laced with citations of landmark decisions, founding documents, and historical crises. His voice carried the cadence of the lecture halls of Harvard. Congress may appropriate funds or pass legislation, but it cannot micromanage the executive's power to act. That separation is fundamental. Even the Supreme Court has acknowledged the need for flexibility during times of crisis. Asterisk, he punctuated his point with a thin smile, clearly confident in the fortress of logic he'd just erected. For a moment, the studio was silent. Then the moderator turned toward Jasmine Crockett. Asterisk, she didn't leap in with outrage or fire. She began calmly, her voice measured, deliberate. It's fascinating to hear you speak of separation of powers, while completely ignoring the responsibility that comes with it. The Constitution doesn't grant kingship. It outlines checks and balances, and those aren't optional. They're structural. Asterisk. Dershowitz blinked. Crockett leaned forward, flipping open a binder marked with color-coded tabs. Let's take a real example. You mentioned Lincoln. He acted under the weight of a civil war. But even then, the courts ruled against certain executive oversteps. You conveniently skip over Ex parte Milligan, where the court said martial law can't replace civilian courts where they're operational. Asterisk, she wasn't just rebutting, she was dismantling. Point by point, she walked through the recent abuses of executive authority, the border emergency declarations, unauthorized military actions, dubious surveillance programs, and showed how, in each case, Dershowitz's framework failed to protect the constitutional order. Asterisk, let's talk about Youngstown Sheet and Tube Co. v. Sawyer, she said, voice rising. The Supreme Court slapped down President Truman when he tried to seize private steel mills during the Korean War. The court didn't care that it was a national emergency. It ruled that the president doesn't get to ignore Congress. That's not just a footnote, that's precedent. Asterisk, the moderator tried to interject, but Crockett wasn't done. What Professor Dershowitz is promoting isn't constitutional theory. It's executive license, and that's dangerous. Because when you argue that a president can override congressional statutes based on their own judgment, you're effectively saying that the will of one outweighs the vote of 535 elected lawmakers. Asterisk. Dershowitz attempted to cut in. That's not what I said. Asterisk. You don't have to say it outright. Your entire argument implies it, she replied without missing a beat. And frankly, I think the American people are tired of lawyers dressing up authoritarianism in academic robes. Asterisk. The crowd stirred audibly. Even the moderator appeared, caught off guard by the force of her statement. Asterisk. Dershowitz shifted uncomfortably, tapping his pen against his notepad. Miss Crockett, he said with a note of forced civility, I've taught constitutional law for half a century. I don't need a lecture on judicial review. Asterisk. No, Crockett said, leaning back slightly but keeping her eyes locked on his. But you might need a reminder that teaching it isn't the same as respecting it. Asterisk. The silence that followed was deafening. Experts backstage were whispering into microphones. One producer mouthed, wow, as Crockett returned to her notes. Asterisk. And just like that, the narrative began to shift. It wasn't just a debate anymore, it was a reckoning. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just countered Dershowitz, she had made. The case that his arguments, once seen as academic gospel, now felt dangerously out of step with democratic values. And the most astonishing part, she wasn't even finished. The instant the segment ended and the camera lights dimmed, the atmosphere in the studio shifted from tense to stunned. Alan Dershowitz sat stiffly, His expression locked somewhere between disbelief and frustration. He adjusted his tie with slow, deliberate movements, as if trying to reassemble his composure. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett was the picture of calm, flipping her notes back into her binder, exchanging a polite nod with the moderator. But make no mistake, she knew exactly what had just happened. Asterisk in the control room, producers and analysts were scrambling. Social media had already erupted. Twitter, now known as X, was on fire. Clips of Crockett's brutal takedown were flooding timelines. Legal experts, journalists, and everyday viewers alike were reacting in real time. One tweet from a prominent legal scholar simply read, "I never thought I'd see Dershowitz get folded like this." Crockett came with fire and facts. Asterisk the buzz only intensified as the second segment began. Now with a panel of 4 legal commentators, 2 conservative to progressive, tasked with analyzing what had just unfolded. The moderator turned to the panel and asked the question on everyone's mind. Was that the most direct dismantling of a constitutional argument we've seen on live television? Asterisk Rachel Zinn, a constitutional law professor from Georgetown, didn't hesitate. Yes, she said. And it wasn't just fiery rhetoric. Crockett cited case law, drew historical context, and exposed logical inconsistencies in Dershowitz's framing. She wasn't grandstanding, she was performing a legal clinic. Asterisk, even one of the conservative analysts, a former Bush-era legal advisor, reluctantly agreed. Dershowitz made a strong opening, he said. But Crockett hit him where it hurt. The modern judicial landscape. You can't talk about executive authority like it's the 1950s. She showed how today's courts, even conservative ones, are curbing that kind of overreach. Asterisk Dershowitz reappeared briefly after the segment, hoping to recover ground in an impromptu interview backstage. The camera caught him mid-sentence, clearly still rattled. "Look, she made some points," he said, "but passion doesn't equal constitutional clarity." She was emotional. That word emotional would prove to be his biggest mistake of the night. Within minutes, a clip of his comment was posted on TikTok, paired with Crockett's.com/surgical delivery. The caption read, "When facts shake your world, just call her emotional." The video racked up 2 million views in under 2 hours. Prominent commentators, including female attorneys and civil rights leaders, blasted Dershowitz for resorting to a tired, gendered dismissal. Asterisk back on set. Crockett took her final turn at the mic. "Let's stop pretending that citing historical injustices and failed legal doctrines makes one noble," she said. "What I did tonight wasn't about ego, was about accountability, because this country is tired of being told that legality and morality are strangers. They're supposed to walk hand in hand." Asterisk, that statement alone was reposted by dozens of elected officials, journalists, and civil rights groups. Activists praised her for speaking truth to entrenched legal power. Cable news talking heads declared her a new star in the making. One headline on MSNBC's Chiron read, "Jasmine Crockett's Constitutional Clinic, a debate that made history." Asterisk later that evening, on a nationally streamed political podcast, Dershowitz made another attempt to salvage his position. "She's articulate, sure," he admitted, "but her arguments are laced with political ideology. We need to separate passion from principle." But even the host, a longtime admirer of Dershowitz, wasn't buying it. "Alan," he said plainly, "you got out-argued badly, and instead of re-engaging, you're dismissing her with That's not how this works anymore." Asterisk meanwhile, Crockett's inbox overflowed with invitations. Major news networks wanted her take on Supreme Court cases. Law schools asked her to keynote upcoming events. Advocacy groups wanted her on panels discussing constitutional law and civil liberties. One morning show even dubbed her the legal storm from Texas. Asterisk, but when asked about the moment during a post-show interview, Crockett remained humble. "I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone," she said, "but I came prepared because I knew the stakes. When you let flawed legal arguments go unchecked, they grow into policies that hurt people. I won't let that happen on my watch." Asterisk, it was more than just a viral moment. It was a shift in the conversation where old guard legal giants were being challenged by a new generation unwilling to bow to precedent that failed to protect the people. And in that studio, under those lights, one thing was clear. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just won a debate, she had rewritten the rules of engagement. Asterisk,